Hello, everyone. Welcome. Tonight, our guests are Carol Offen and Betty Crais, authors, organ donors, and recipients and organ donation advocates. Carol is a living kidney donor, and Dr. Elizabeth Crais is a two-time kidney transplant recipient and liver transplant recipient. They are here tonight to discuss their book, The Insider's Guide to Living Kidney Donation, everything you need to know if you give or get the greatest gift, and their donation advocacy. Carol is a writer and an editor who previously worked on her City College newspaper, the CCNY campus, where she met her husband Neil Offen. After college, she was a country music magazine editor and writer before she and her husband moved to France, where her son was born. For nearly a decade, she wrote freelance articles on French actresses, dining, travel, and other topics which appeared in Esquire, Vogue, Family Circle, and the International Herald Tribune. Several were syndicated worldwide. They came back to the States in the mid-'80s. Instead of returning to New York City, they moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where their daughter was born after living in Provence for several years. They'd grown partial to a warmer, more laid-back way of life. As a book editor, she enjoyed a wide range of genres, from outdoor books to scholarly publishing. She later worked for 15 years as an independent research institute, where she edited mostly health-related materials for a lay audience. Carol is also a prolific blogger on her website, www.kidneydonorhelp.com, and for medium.com. She donated a kidney to her son Paul in 2006, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. Our other guest, Dr. Elizabeth Crais, she likes to be called Betsy, PhD, is a retired professor in the Division of Speech and Hearing Sciences, the Department of Health Sciences at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Although she is retired, she is also serving as an adjunct professor as she continues to work on autism-related research and guidance to families with young children with disabilities. She has had many grants and publications in autism and the broader developmental delay areas. And by the way, folks, if you want to drill down on our guests tonight, you want to see the work that they've done, the things that they've published, etc., if you go to the broadcast that is pinned to the top of my Facebook page and in the comments, all of that information and the links are there. So you can find that sort of thing. She received her first kidney transplant in 2004 after having both kidneys removed from one of her research colleagues, Linda Watson. Linda's kidney gave her new life and health and well-being for 17 years, but then began to lose some of its functioning. So the hunt for a new kidney was on, and a return to dialysis. Fortunately, Betsy had another donor volunteer, Tiffany, and I'm going to spell this because I know I'm not going to mispronounce it, Wyranosk, through her research with Vanderbilt University, and the surgery was set for December of 2019. Unfortunately, through the workup, Betsy learned that she also needed a liver too, and UNC was not performing liver and kidney operations together at that time. Thus, she spent 1.5 years on dialysis until a deceased donor could be identified. The second surgery was completed in May of 2021. She is healthy and happy to have a second chance. Previously, she was an autism researcher on a team that developed a screening tool for infants, a home-based intervention for toddlers, and a school-based intervention for preschool children. While at UW, Elizabeth was diagnosed with polycystic kidney disease, a disease that runs in her family, with her mother and 2 of her sisters who were also affected. In 2004, she received a kidney transplant from one of her research colleagues at UNC, and more recently was the recipient of a double kidney liver transplant in 2021 from a deceased donor. Please give a warm welcome to our two authors and organ donation advocates. Carol Offen and Betsy Crais are with us tonight. Ladies, how are we?
Good, thank you. Good to see you again, Jim.
Yes, good. Yeah,
Good to see both of you.
thanks.
Did I state everything correctly in the introduction?
Yes, and more.
Yeah.
I was surprised, but thank you.
Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Please tell us a little bit about your families. Let's start with Carol.
Okay. Well, let's see. My husband, Neil, and I met in college, and we've been married for 54 years. I can't believe that, right? And our oldest, Paul, is in his 40s, is 44, and he was born when we lived in France. And our daughter, he's my recipient, and our daughter, Nora, was born here. She was actually born in a car, but that's another story. And she was born, she's 35. She was born here in North Carolina.
Okay. Betsy, your turn.
Yep. All right. So I have just moved. I was in Chapel Hill, where Carol is, and just moved about 15 miles south to the area called Pittsboro, North Carolina. My husband, Michael Wagner, is, as people say, the wind under my wings. He's been a supporter for a long time. He's just retired also. He was a remodeling contractor. And we met in Sam's Old Time Ballroom in Fort Collins, Colorado, just by happenstance. And he asked me to dance. So there you go. I got it started. And I have two children, as Carol does. And my oldest is Rachel. And she lives in LA. And some of you who know LA know the Magic Castle. Is this magic club there, well known, I suppose. And she is heading up the decoration crew. So she's working hard to get it all ready for Halloween. My son, his name is Sam, lives here in the area and just recently moved to a condo. So we're pleased about that. Bit of empty nesting going on. So that's nice.
Great. Great. Let's start with Carol. Please tell us a little bit about where you grew up, your education, and your employment experiences.
Okay. Well, I'm born and raised in New York City. And even though I could never live there again, I still love the place. But I've been in the South too long, I guess. And as I said, as you said, I went to City College of New York, CCNY, which used to be known as the proletarian Harvard. That was something we all liked to tout. The New York Times called it that once. Anyway, I was an English major. I was on the college newspaper, as you said, and immediately went into editorial and writing jobs after college. Here I was a New Yorker. I worked for a country music magazine. Here I was in my 20s. I worked for a retirement living magazine. So I've kind of, I don't think of myself as adventurous, but I do kind of get out of my comfort zone a lot, I guess. And those are, I guess, two examples. And after I worked at the magazines, I freelanced for a couple of years before we left for France. And I did a book on country music called Country Music, the Poetry, which was a collection of song lyrics with comments and by theme and such. That was fun. And we moved to France in 1976, and I freelanced there. I didn't have a work permit, so I wrote about anything that Americans might have heard of or be interested in. So, hence, well-known actresses, celebrities, chefs, women chefs. I would go out also to film sets if a movie was on location, which often happened in Paris. I would go out and I would interview some of the actors or actresses. My one strong memory was of interviewing Diane Lane when she was about 13 years old, on the set of A Little Romance in France, in Paris. Anyway, when we came back here, I freelanced a little bit and then got into full-time editorial jobs, and I worked at what's called now the School of Government at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I was director of publications there, and at the Research Institute you mentioned, RTI International, is a really fantastic organization, and I worked there for 15 years, and that's where I retired from in 2015.
Okay. All right. Betsy, your turn. Tell
Okay.
us a little bit about where you grew up, your education and employment experiences.
Okay. All right. So I started out in Alabama. I lived in Birmingham, a little southern suburb called Hollywood. It was lovely, idyllic growing up, children playing in the street and all of that, going to the neighborhood schools. After I graduated from high school, I went to the University of Alabama, and I after majoring in a couple of other things like history and math and so forth, I ended up in communication, so oral interpretation, debate, so forth. And while I was there, the speech and hearing communication with disorders side was on the other side of the building. So I took an elective over there, got hooked, and said, okay, this is it. Called my parents, and I finally found my career. So I took all sort of speech and hearing classes my senior year, then went to Vanderbilt for graduate school. So funny that that Carol and I have that connection of country music. I got very introduced to country music while I was there, and bluegrass music, and love it still. Then I left after 8 years. After I finished my master's degree, I went to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and worked in a large speech and hearing center there as a clinician. Worked with really all ages, really almost after birth, all the way up to older people who'd had strokes and so forth. Then wound around a couple of other places in the country, worked at the other UNC, that's what we say in our part of the country now, the University of Northern Colorado for a couple of years teaching there, then decided to go back for my PhD. So that was in Wisconsin, in Madison. In the meantime, I met my husband in Colorado, as I mentioned, at Sam's Old Time Ballroom. Of course, we have a son named Sam, insisted on by my husband. And so after I finished my program in Madison, I had a good connection in North Carolina. And while I was in Chattanooga, I had hiked, camped, kayaked, everything in North Carolina. So it was sort of my dream place to come back to. A job opened at UNC, the University of Northern Colorado, North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and came here. And that was in 1986, and have been here ever since. Moved up associate to professor. And my sideline, besides teaching, was autism research. And this team, I worked interdisciplinary team. We've, as you mentioned, we developed a screening tool for 12-month-olds. We developed a home-based intervention for families to help work with their children at home. And we developed a preschool intervention. So it's been a busy time. Most recently, we developed a family navigation guide that's online and is free. And families and their partners who maybe are navigators in the state or service coordinators can work through it to help the families find the resources they need. And then in 23, last year, I retired, or part-time retired, moved to an adjunct position to make this happen. And I'm continuing on working on the navigation guide. We've developed it, translated into Spanish. We're working with pediatricians and a lot of providers in the state. So that's about it.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Let's go to Carol first. Please tell us how you two met. What were the circumstances?
Our kids. Both, I guess we met maybe 25 years ago, maybe something like that. Our daughters were in Girl Scouts, and we famously shared a pup tent on a camping trip. And you get to know somebody pretty well in a pup tent. And we were friends for a long time, and then drifted apart for a while as our daughters went in different directions, I guess, as they got older, and crossed paths periodically. And while I was working actually at RTI, as I think you said, doing a lot of health related research projects. And Betsy was one of the related researchers on it. We had contracts with UNC as contributors. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've been thinking of her. And I may have this out of order a little bit, but I knew that Betsy had received a kidney. And when our son Paul was diagnosed with kidney disease, before we knew we needed a transplant, I had contacted her. And then when he, we'll talk more about that later, but when he started dialysis, she was just a great resource to kind of give in the trenches advice. And ultimately we did a book together, which you'll hear more about.
Great. Betsy, approximately when did your first meeting occur?
When did Carol's and my first meeting, you mean?
Yes, ma'am.
About the book? Oh gosh, we worked on this book for a long time. And, rather than say it took us a long time, it took us a long time to write a good book. We researched everything in the book is well researched. I guess that's both of our backgrounds. And, so we spent a while. And so I would say, gosh, we seriously started talking about it, in the 200s, I would say, what, Carol,
2014 was the first official meeting.
Yeah. And it was kind of funny because after my transplant, I'd even sketched out an outline in who might write different chapters. But then, of course, got back to work and life happened. And, at the time I had younger children, and so put it away. And then at some point, Carol contacted me. This is after Paul's transplant, contacted me and said, I've been thinking about a book. You want to talk about it? And I said, I've been thinking about a book too. So it was just perfect timing for both of us to then be able to turn our attention to the book.
Okay. I want to make sure that people understand. So I'm just looking for a short answer here. Carol, it's my understanding that you are a kidney donor. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Betsy, you are a 2-time organ recipient with 2 kidney transplants and a liver transplant. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right. I got something right. Way to go, Uncle Jim. Carol, let's talk about your circumstances first. I understand that you donated a kidney to your son, Paul. Is that right?
Right.
Tell us, approximately when did his kidneys fail?
He was in college when he was first diagnosed with kidney disease, and they thought that it could be years and years before it ever progressed to the point of kidney failure. And so they said, let's monitor it. Let's try mega doses of fish oil. Let's do a bunch of things. And that kind of went on okay until soon after he graduated from college. And so that would have been 2020. No, not 2024. What am I saying? 2006. No, the transplant was in 2006. Sorry. 2004 was when we found out that his kidneys were failing. His numbers had been just inching up, the creatinine, and he went for one of his routine lab work checks, and I don't know what it was at this point, but it was a precipitous increase, and so much so that they thought it was a fluke. And I went with him for the repeat checkup to redo the tests, and it was no fluke. They said, yeah, it's actually getting worse. So what they thought could be 20 years, if ever, before it got to kidney failure. Here he was literally months after just getting out of college and told that he was going to need to go on dialysis in a matter of months, but ultimately needed a transplant.
Okay.
Yeah,
I understand, Carol, that it was IgA nephropathy that caused Paul's kidneys to fail. Is that right?
that's right.
And he did end up on dialysis. Approximately when did that happen?
So dialysis started just maybe 2 or 3 months after this discovery. So I think around October 2004, and he was on dialysis for 20 months. He can probably tell you
Okay.
how many days.
Probably. Are we talking about in-center hemodialysis?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
And I understand that your family, yourself, your husband Neil, your daughter Nora, all tested to donate to Paul, but your husband and your daughter were unable to donate. Is that correct?
Not exactly. We all wanted to be tested. Neil never got past the screening, the long application screening. When they found out that he had a kidney stone, they wouldn't go any further. And our daughter was only 14. So they
Okay.
right off, they said, no, we wouldn't even consider her. So yeah, so that left me.
And you were a match for Paul's blood type?
Oh yeah. Actually, we all were. I'm O, type O. Problem is, he's type O. So as you know, that made it more difficult to find someone who was the right, who could donate to the O.
Okay. And I understand that before your son's illness, you've described yourself as kind of a wimp. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Oh yeah, I still am. I mean, I'm not proud of it, but it's me. I don't like needles. I never look. I've been known to faint, not just after a shot, but I once passed out because I thought there was going to be a blood test on my college orientation thing, and I was thinking about it so much that I was out. So yeah, I'm not. That goes for anything medical or physical or. So yeah, that's definitely still the case. No, no change there.
Okay. Why did you go through with the donation, considering that you have this issue with needles?
Because he's my son. And I don't mean to be glib because I don't. I mean, there are other considerations. I also had a daughter. I had a 90-year-old father who had moved down here. So not everybody, I firmly believe that any parent who could, if the circumstances were right, would do what I did. But I'm just saying that there are other factors that people consider. But yeah, and the fact that I was the one, I was the one who could do it. And at a certain point, I actually wanted to do it. I mean, not just, well, I know I have to do it. I mean, I think when we first found out that he needed the kidney, and so I reflexively said, yes, I want to be tested. But if somebody had come forward, or if my husband hadn't had the kidney stone and they let him, fine, go for it. I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have felt bad, but for the 20 months that he was on dialysis, it was just so painful to watch. It was really hell for him. And so after a while, it was like, I want to be the one. I want to be the one to end this nightmare for him and wave the magic wand. If it's close to a magic wand that anybody, it's a hell of a wand, but it was in my power to do it, thank God, and I did. It was
Okay. I understand that the date of Paul's kidney transplant and your donation was June 28th, 2006. Can you tell us a little bit about?
I'm sorry. Actually, I missed that before. It's June 27th.
Okay.
But everything else, yeah, 2006. I'm sorry.
Okay. Tell us what happened that day from your perspective as a kidney donor.
I went in. I guess I had to be there like 6 a.m. Scared stiff, excited, but really scared, really nervous. Paul went to the hospital the night before, the day before, so they could do dialysis in the hospital. And strangely enough, they took him first. I think usually it's the other way around. But they took him in first. And then when I went, and this was at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, UNC. And when I woke up, my husband Nora and Neil came in to see me, and I knew Paul was out of surgery already, and I said, "How is he?" And he said, "Could have been worse," which I loved, which I really loved. And I, of course, at that point did not feel great. And that's very common. But I'll tell you, going in to the room, once I was out of the recovery room, the nurses and the staff treated me like royalty. It was quite an experience I've never had before or since. It's pretty weird, but it was kind of cool. They couldn't have been nicer.
Right.
And you want to tell about your certificate?
Excuse me?
You want to tell about your certificate?
Oh gosh. Yeah, do I have it on the wall? I should know it by heart. Anyway, the day, that's right. I got it, I think, soon after the donation when I went for a follow-up. A certificate of appreciation signed by my transplant surgeon, my donor coordinator, my transplant nephrologist. And it was in appreciation and for giving an opportunity for new life. And I cheered up when I read it out loud. And every time I reread it since, and now I can't think of the words, but you get the idea. And it was pretty special. And I don't think we're on the wall somewhere.
Okay. Did you have any issues or complications after transplant?
Did I know? I had a very easy recovery. A few days later, how big hospitals are and the long corridors, and always, walking up and down with Neil and Nora to the cafe, which is on another floor, and back and forth, and down to my son's room. And I was really pretty good. I mean, little by little, like you lose the catheter, you lose the IV, and so it was a process. But once I got home, it was quite smooth.
Great, great. From the date of the transplant to the present, has your son had any health issues or complications?
He hasn't had complications, but he has had health issues. In the past 5-6 years, he had a pretty serious, he had a diagnosis of testicular cancer, which kind of came out of nowhere. Yeah, and it was kind of, they don't think it had anything to do with the kidney, with the transplant, but it sure didn't make treatment easy. And so it was, fortunately, it was discovered very early, went into surgery immediately to remove the lump. But the problem was, they said if it were to come back, normally it's very treatable. If it comes back, they use chemo, goes fast. But the particular kind of chemo in this particular case is toxic to the kidneys. So they couldn't take that risk. And so he wound up having major surgery to remove the abdominal lymph nodes. That's the bad news. The good news is 6 years later, he's cancer-free. It all went, he had great support, and the transplant team was involved. I don't know, they may even have had somebody in the OR with them. I mean, they were like watching, okay, don't get too close to the incision, don't get too close to the new kidney. They all worked together, and it was rough, obviously. But he's been through a hell of a lot. He came through that, and he's had other things where, as you know, being on anti-rejection meds makes everything more precarious. So they've had to adjust meds a lot when he's had infections. But right now things are stable, and the kidney itself has been doing well.
That's great news. This is after what, 18 years?
Now we're at the 18-year point. Yeah. So any of this didn't even happen until the 13 years or so. Yeah.
Okay. Betsy, it's my understanding that you were born with polycystic kidney disease.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And you were diagnosed in 1986 around the age of 35. My mother told me I'm not supposed to ask questions like that.
Oh, it's all right.
Please talk to us a little bit about your family's history with PKD.
Okay. All right. So ultimately, we learned that my mother had PKD, her mother, and then the grandfather. And the grandfather, they talked about that he died of what they called then Bright's disease, which was sort of a wastebasket term for any kind of kidney problems. But I found out that my mother had it. So I'm a grown young adult. I'm in the doctoral program at the University of Wisconsin. I'm eating tons of cheese because, of course, we were in Wisconsin, yogurt and everything. And I did start having some trouble. I eventually discovered that I have lactose intolerance. So that's what drove me. I was having bloating. So I went in for testing, and that's when they found me. They showed me the x-ray, and I had these big black holes in both kidneys. And I was just shocked, as a, runner, tennis player, just active and everything. So that night I called my mother, and she said, I just blew my mind. She said, "Oh yeah, I have that too. And tell them that your bloating and all that problem is some other thing. They have to keep looking." And so, I was just, stunned. And so I said, "Mom, you haven't told any of us, you have 4 daughters, and we're all grown now. When were you going to tell us about this PKD you have?" But of course, her generation, was the Depression era and all that. And they didn't talk about medical things, and they didn't tell you anything really. So of course, then I got the news out to my sisters and said, "Do you guys know this?" Well, my oldest sister had had a kidney removed when she was in her 20s. It had just ballooned, and she was terrified that it was cancer. and eventually it was removed. But even then, we didn't know about the PKD connection. So it's pretty odd.
Wow.
But yeah, so my mother, and the other thing that was kind of not great was that my mother was 82 when she passed away. And I'll tell you about that later when we talk about other things of complications of PKD. But she never had any problems except high blood pressure. And so all of us, I think, were kind of lulled into, oh, well, if we ever have any problems, it'll be much later in life. And so for me to discover at 35 that I had polycystic kidney disease was pretty shocking at the same. I have 3 sisters, and 2 of the 3 have polycystic kidney disease. And all 3 of us had transplants in our 50s, as it turned out. So that was pretty interesting because, again, we all had these views that it would be way later in life when we would have any impact of this.
Okay.
Oh, and you
Does your family also have polycystic liver disease that runs in the family?
Yes. And so I have it and, ultimately needed another transplant of a liver later. My mother and only one of my sisters had it. So that was kind of interesting that it missed one of the sisters. And it's always, I know this is kind of funny, but the third sister that didn't have polycystic kidney, we used to tease her because she's blonde and quite voluptuous and, very beautiful. And we always teased her that she was either the milkman's or the mailman's, because she just didn't look like the rest of us who are brown, tan skin and things like that, kind of skinny. And so here we go. She clearly had some different genes. So the liver polycystic kidney issue is a big problem, or was a big problem.
Okay, I want to give a shout out to my friend Elizabeth Odom, who's been commenting on the broadcast, and she says you ladies are doing a great job.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Tell me, Betsy, have you had challenges with PKD since the time you were diagnosed?
Yes, particularly in the beginning. It didn't bother me for quite a number of years. Eventually, I got diagnosed with lactose intolerance and, began taking lactate pills, and that knocked that out. So the bloating and all of that went away. So I lived, for a number of years with this disease without it really bothering me. I paid attention to my salt and fluid intake and things like that, but it really didn't mess with my life, so to speak. But then later, unbeknownst to me, unfortunately, my numbers began to change a little bit. And the doctor I was working with, the nephrologist, retired, and he passed me on to a young colleague. And as soon as I saw her the very first time, she suggested an MRI. And so I thought, gosh, that's kind of overkill, but okay. Well, it came back, and the next visit that I had with her, she talked about the T word, transplant, and the D word, dialysis. And it just blew me out of the water. I remember going back to my office and just closing the door and just sitting there and go, oh my gosh, how could this have happened so fast? So then I went back to my doctor the next time and I said to her, I know this is going to be hard for you because he was your mentor, but how did this happen without me even knowing it? And then she said, she was very polite, but and respectful, but she said, well, the older generation had a different view of patient, relationships with their doctors. And they kind of believed that they wanted to protect you from any bad news until they just had to tell you. And I just couldn't believe it. And she said, us younger generation believe in collaborating with the patient and working together to think through things and make decisions. So, it was a big wake-up call for me to start paying much more attention to my numbers, and watching out for how my own health was going. And since then, it's made me, every time I meet a new doctor, I start the spiel and I say, earlier I had a doctor that so-and-so. What I'd like to do is know everything. I'm one of those people who wants to know it right at the beginning. And some of them take a look back and go, gosh, okay. Yeah. But it's just a way that I, interact with my own health now, taking more care. And I think the other thing that happened for me that I was unaware of, and I think people didn't know much about it, and that is my other 2 sisters had their children before the expression of PKD. And I had mine later. I just was later getting married, later having kids. And so it was well after I'd been diagnosed that I had my first child. And I noticed that I couldn't lose my baby weight, and I just kept, and I finally got so skinny, except for this baby weight, that they ended up putting me in the hospital. And I remember my nephrologist came and I told him why. And he said, "You have polycystic kidney disease." And he gave me 2 articles and said, when sort of the growth hormones start to help the baby along, they're going to feed your cysts. Well, with my second child, Sam, 4 years later, I was, maybe 3 months, and I wasn't even showing, but I was having this terrible pain in my ribs. So I went in, saw the nephrologist. He scoped me and he said, "Oh my gosh, your liver is huge. Instead of being this tiny thing under your ribs, it's expanded, and that's what's making you hurt." So he said, "It's like the 9th month of pregnancy when your ribs are stretching, and give it a few weeks and it'll get better." So there were a few things, but otherwise, health wise, it was not bad.
Okay. Approximately when did your kidneys fail?
Well, let's see. My transplant, my nephrectomy was in 2003, and it was the spring before that when my doctor had said the F word. F word. Oh gosh, sorry. The T word and the D word. I said the F word, but anyway, that's when she had mentioned this. We'd had the MRI, so we just kind of watched it through the summer. It just began, my numbers continued, to look bad, and so that fall she said, "Okay, it's time, and you're either going to have to go on dialysis or have a transplant." My husband immediately volunteered. He couldn't be because he'd had skin cancer, and then another friend. And so it was just disappointing. And my colleague, Linda Watson, who was with me on our research team, started doing donor testing without my knowing it. And I had scheduled the surgery. It was going to be right after Thanksgiving. She called me on Thanksgiving Day or the day before and said, "Your transplant coordinator insisted I call you." And I'm going, "What is she talking to my transplant coordinator for?" And she said, "I've been going through donor testing. I didn't want you to know because I didn't want you to be disappointed. And I've made it." And of course, we're both crying on the phone. And after the holidays when we saw each other, we're crying in our offices. It's quite the big deal. But, it was just life-saving because I had already planned to have the surgery. So in November of 2003, they took out, both kidneys, double nephrectomy. And my surgeon said that I needed to wait 4 months to be able to have the transplant. And so that's what we decided. We did it at spring break that spring of 2004. Okay.
And I take that all of this took place at UNC?
Yes, it did. Yes. And we'll brag on Ken Andreoni, the surgeon who did both of our surgeries, and he wrote the foreword to our book.
Right. I remember. So the first kidney transplant, my notes tell me it took place in 2004.
That's right. And so I was only on dialysis for those 4 months between the nephrectomy and the transplant, which was, very short. I felt very lucky. And it was, clinic hemodialysis. Okay.
And Linda was a research colleague. She was a match for you. She was your live kidney donor for the first transplant, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And what was the day of your first transplant like as a recipient?
Oh, it was just wonderful. I felt so great. I couldn't believe it. And everybody that came in said, "Oh my gosh, you look so great. You're pink," and things like that. And Dr. Andreoni told me later that as soon as they hooked up the kidney, he said it pinked right up. And so immediately the blood started flowing and, it started working. So it was, it was a great time. And I just realized what time it is. So I'm happy to move on to the book unless you have a few other questions about me, Jim.
Oh yeah, I have a little bit more, and Betsy, don't worry about the time. I'm with you guys until we're finished.
Okay, thanks.
Period. So, my notes tell me that your transplant lasted 17 years. How was it that you began to notice that the first transplant was failing?
It was really, my testing, and my nephrologist, at the time said, "Gosh, we're going to have to start thinking, about another transplant. And I was blown away because I'm such an optimist. I was sure I was going to make like the 30-year mark or something like that. A few people have. And I, was disappointed. But then it was back to the, game of, okay, how do I find a donor? And so if anybody wants ideas, I just told everyone. I told everyone that I worked with. I wrote a little blurb about it, sent it out to all my networks and said, it's hard to ask yourself, but I'd love for you guys to start shopping around, for a donor for me. In the meantime, I went on dialysis, of course, and was on dialysis about a year and a half. I started out back to the clinic where I'd been before. And sadly, some of the same people I had been on dialysis with 17 years before were still there. It was heartbreaking to see that they were still on dialysis and, older and more frail and things like that. Ultimately, though, they trained me to do home dialysis, which was just cool. It was scary, to be putting tubes and, needles in yourself. But it worked out great because I could plan my own schedule. And, my husband and I would get it started about 4:00 and I'd read or study a little bit or something. And then we'd watch some news. He would, heat up the dinner that I'd made the night before. And then about 8:00, we would take me off the machine. So it was very convenient. It was during COVID. So it was wonderful not to have to go back into the clinic and be with all those other, people who were in the same condition that I was in.
Okay. I understand that you had a second transplant. You had another living donor lined up, Tiffany.
Yes.
Who was supposed to donate in December of 2019, but that didn't happen. Can you tell us what did happen?
Yes, her name is Tiffy Wojnarowski, and she is a researcher and professor at Vanderbilt, which is funny. That's where I did my master's work. And we had become to know each other through the autism world. We had begun doing a little bit of research together. And Linda was the link. Linda Watson, who also is a speech pathologist and researcher, let Tiffany know that I needed a donor. And she just almost offered immediately. We had the surgery set up completely. She was going to do it. We were going to do it right in December as soon as she finished classes. I had found her a little bed and breakfast loan from neighbors up the street that were going to loan her and her husband their little house to stay the whole time. She'd been to Chapel Hill to have her testing. It was all set up. And a week before, I got this terrible virus. And it was so bad, chills and fever and all of this, that they had me come in for testing and they sent me right to the hospital. And so I was hospitalized, began on dialysis. And as soon as, dialysis there, I had, I can't remember the name of it, but it's this disorder where you turn into a pumpkin, which I did, CITES it's called. And my stomach ballooned up. It was the biggest it had ever been. It was really like the biggest pumpkin you've seen. And so then they started draining fluid, all kinds of things. Then they had done liver testing before, but now they begin to even look more clearly because they realized it was liver fluid. And so, of course, then they came in. It was so terrible. They came in and said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to postpone the transplant next week because you're going to need a liver tube. And it'll probably make me cry even just thinking about it. And the worst phone call was to Tiffany. I was feeling the worst for her, that she'd been through all this testing and concern, and her husband's concern, and her family's concerned, and then for nothing. Because as I mentioned, that UNC wasn't doing double transplants in, or kidney liver transplants in. And now they are, but it just wasn't ready for me. And so I had to tell her that she couldn't be my donor, and it was very sad. But we're still connected. Each time I get to Nashville, I see her, and I'm always thankful again that she was willing to do this for me.
My notes tell me you ended up with a deceased donor for your double organ transplant, and that the second transplant took place in May of 2021.
Yes,
is that correct?
Right. That's right. So I was on dialysis about a year and a half. And luckily, so any of you who may need to do this too, because of my polycystic disease, as my nephrologist explained, and the surgeon, the two of them said, with this kind of problem, you're never going to have a very high number on the transplant list because you're healthy in all other means. It would have been better to have like, liver cirrhosis or something because I would have been higher. So he wrote a letter. He was originally going to do it, but it was right during COVID, at the beginning of COVID. And he said, let's wait till things settle down there. And so we did. And I don't know, several months later, he wrote a letter and said, look at this woman. Here's her situation. She really needs a kidney. And sure enough, they gave me a few extra points. I think it was 3 points. And within, 2 weeks, I got my first call to come in, to be, I was second in line. And ultimately the first person got the kidney, but I, went home. Then they called me a second time. I was a second time. And then luckily the third was the third charm. And I was first that time and I got the kidney.
Excellent. Excellent. And how are you feeling? What is your current condition?
I'm doing great. I've just had some tests done and, everything's going great. And they've moved me to every couple of months, every 2 months of blood work. And, so it's just doing great. It was rougher than the first transplant. I think probably the dual organ. And then, as I've said to a lot of people, I did kind of whack-a-mole. I had C. diff and gout and, several other things, thrush. And it was just sort of one thing after another. So it was a little bit longer recovery than I had planned. But still, it was, I had the surgery in May and I went back to work in October. So it was, and I'm doing great now.
Great. Great. Let's talk about the book.
Yes.
The Insider's Guide to Living Kidney Donation, everything you need to know if you give or get the greatest gift. Carol, where can people go to purchase this product?
Just about anywhere that where they buy their books, certainly Amazon as always. And actually, though, if they do it this week, there's a promotion through BookBaby. We're offering 15% off with the promo code Uncle Jim. By a strange coincidence.
Maybe you should do it, Carol. We had a chat before Jim and I did, and
it's
make it Carol.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
My fault for not taking that up with you. My bad. So the folks know that streaming across the screen is the link to Amazon where you can purchase the book. Great. And there are other links where you can purchase, including a link that Carol mentioned. And if you go to my personal Facebook page, pinned to the top of the page is the broadcast. In the comments under Carol's links, you'll find other links where you can buy the book. Carol, you have a website too. Can you tell us a little bit about your website?
Sure. It's called Could You Be a Living Kidney Donor, I think. The address is kidneydonorhelp.com. And I launched it while we were working on the book. I got impatient to be able to do something concrete before the book came out. And basically the idea is to have resources and a blog for people who might be considering, who might be a wimp like me, and who might who hesitate for any reason. And my line is, if a wimp like me can do it, you probably can too, if you're healthy enough. And so there's a lot of resources and FAQs there. And I do have a page on the website for the book. So the subheading is The Insider's Guide to Living Kidney Donation. And there's reviews and a blurb by you, Jim. Jim was kind enough to do the blurb for when the book came out. And I've enjoyed doing the website. I have to admit that with writing for Medium over the past year, I've done less on the website. Frankly, the Medium pieces get a little more exposure. And so I that's kind of the idea. I don't just write about kidneys on Medium, but anytime that I have something that might work for a general audience, I'll put it on Medium as well. And we can talk more later, but I just really, really want to get the word about kidney donation and transplant to a general audience. I mean, your listeners are great, but we're preaching to the choir here. They know how important this subject is. They know a lot about it, and I'm just trying my damnedest to let people realize that it's a lot more pervasive and a lot more important than people realize.
Well, hopefully we'll share the replay, Carol, and I will ask everybody that's watching the broadcast tonight and the people that see the replay, please share the broadcast. Share it to your personal Facebook page so your lay friends get a chance to see it. And there are people that have kidney disease that don't know that they have it.
Right.
In fact, the large proportion of people that have kidney disease go undiagnosed for quite some time. So you want to make sure to share with all your friends and make sure that they're aware that there is this issue. And if they find that they have this issue, the book is available. It's a terrific book. I mean, it's a well-researched, well-written. We're going to go into it a little bit in a moment, but I just want to say honestly, I have guests on that are authors all the time. These are my two favorites.
Oh, thank you.
This is the best book that I've read about kidney donation in a long, long time. So, and your Uncle Jim reads them all. So, please share. Betsy, let's talk for a minute about why we need more living donors. What options does a kidney recipient have if there's no match?
Yeah, so I'll just say a couple of things, and Carol, add in if you want to too, about the need. And unfortunately, I think there, as we talk about in the book, there's some myths, about people desecrating their bodies or fear. Certainly there are probably other people out there who claim that they're wimps as well. So I think there are other reasons, and then unfortunately, some populations don't donate as much as others, and so that makes another shortage all the way around. We also, I think we also know that it's hard to find a match. It's not just a simple thing, although it's better these days than it was when we were going through this, that you don't have to have as many, matched up, in terms of the tests that are done. There's sort of 6 factors, and you don't have to have all 6 anymore. So it's easier to be a donor than it was, in the past. And in terms of alternatives, there's now paired donations. And, that's, if Carol and I weren't a match to each other, then we would find, or the physicians and UNOS would find 2 other people who weren't a match either. And then we'd see if we were matches with them. And then, I might give to somebody else and somebody else might give to Carol and so forth. And so, and there have been strings, gosh, of like, I don't know, I think 100 pairs, in one series. And I think I can't remember what one of the television shows last year or so showed a series like that. And one of the people dropped out. And of course, it messed up really the whole chain. So eventually they got somebody to fill in. Of course, it was perfect on television. But so that's another means. And, they're just, unfortunately, then, if you don't get a match, you're going to stay on dialysis or go on dialysis and then stay on dialysis for a period of time. What did I leave out, Carol?
Well, there are some things like, what's it called? Plasmapheresis, I think, which is a little bit, so they can actually treat it, I guess, if somebody has antibodies and they can, I'm going to screw this up, but medically, but there are some options. I think that I think Dr. Andreoni, remember, had said that the best thing though is still an actual match, not to that's still the gold standard. And so if it can't be a direct donor, if it's through a paired donation, and they with computer databases, I mean, it's enormous what the National Kidney Registry and Alliance for Paired Donation, what they can come up with.
And blood match, epaulette type matching, more precise. We had experts on the broadcast that talked about how the risk of death in kidney donation has gone down to less than 1%.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of good news as far as potential kidney donors are concerned. Carol, talk to us a little bit about what the potential donor obstacles are and the best way to handle those.
Well, I'd like to say there aren't many, but alas, there are. I had a best case scenario. My son had a living donor, same family, same town. The major transplant center was here. I had a supportive employer. These things aren't items that everybody can take for granted. Mm-hmm. And so some of the obstacles are financial and practical in terms of the workplace. And as you know, the Living Donor Protection Act will at least protect people from being discriminated against by life insurance companies and
employers,
long-term care, long-term care. So there's some things like that, but there's also emotional. I always say transplant and donation isn't just a medical experience; it's total. So it's financial, it's emotional, it's social, it's familial, and people go through a lot of issues. Again, I was fortunate, but sometimes people have if someone's donating to someone not in their family. I know lots of donors who've had pushback from family members who said, "How could you do this? How can you're crazy, or you're not thinking of your own child, your own family." And I think the answer with all of these things is to get the support you need. Talk to the donor coordinator, talk to the social worker, talk to the ILDA, the Independent Living Donor Advocate at the transplant center. For all of these things, there are supports emotionally and socially. There's the Facebook groups that didn't exist when Betsy and I were contemplating our experiences originally. Just about everybody knows about some donor financial assistance for donors, in addition to the Living Donor, National Living Donor Assistance Center. There's various places, there's various ways to protect your rights, and don't hesitate to reach out and, for help, for emotional support or needing resources. There's so many things out there now. And one of the things we wanted to do with the book was to vet those resources, because there's a little too much out there. A lot of it is conflicting if you just go online. If you've ever gone online and searched for living kidney donation, there'll be about 1 million hits that'll come back. So basically, I would say take advantage of any support, any resources that you can. And certainly we'll talk in a little bit about advocacy, about legislative advocacy. There are ways that the law can can help.
Okay. Let's talk about D-Day or Donation Day. Betsy, from your point of view as a recipient, what is it important for people to know?
Well, let's see. As I mentioned earlier, the first thing is to know that, unless you have a dedicated donor, particularly for me, as having a deceased donor, it may occur multiple times. One of my sisters, I think, went in 7 or 8 times. The first time she went in, she called all the family. All the family was alerted. And then the next day she called us back and said, no, it's false alarm. So after that, she didn't call us at all until finally it was the real thing. So that's one thing. And then what I found, I was kind of surprised to find how long a wait it was. Those other times, the 2 times that I went in, they have to often fly to get the kidney. They have to examine it there. They bring it to your hospital. They have to examine it there, do all these tests. Then they test it with the first person who's lined up first, and so each time I'd usually spend at least a night and getting dialysis again to be prepped up for the surgery. And then yet not eating, the whole time. And then finally, sometime maybe later in the day, the next day I would go home. So it's just something, to think about. But the other thing that was, it was also just exciting, and especially with Linda, that I knew we were donors. And she had she had a friend who made bracelets of stone, and each stone had a different meaning for health and this and that, and the other kidneys. And so we had matching bracelets, and they let us come together on our gurneys, and yes, they did take her first, but we held hands for a few minutes and had a few words together, teary, but it was very sweet. And I actually was more concerned about her than I was for me, which maybe was a good thing to keep me, from having some anxiety.
Okay. Carol, from your point of view as a donor, what's important for folks to know?
About the day itself or in general?
The day itself.
Okay. I think that you probably will feel pretty rotten at first, but it doesn't last long. It really doesn't. And as I said, the staff and everybody were just so great. And since this was 18 years ago, I was there for 4 days. Now I think they send people home the next day. But by the time I went home, I think I had maybe had a mild painkiller then. I remember the pharmacist was really impressed. He said, wow, she must be pretty strong. And my husband laughed. I mean, knowing, no, this is the wimp, remember? But I really didn't need anything. I mean, I think I, went to Tylenol. So if it's discouraging, my donor coordinator had warned me that not so much the incision, but that the shoulder blades was where I was going to feel, not the shoulder blades, the collarbone, that the gas kind of rises up from where they inflate your belly to get to the kidney. And so that's where you kind of tend to have the pains. And unfortunately, it hurt most when I laughed. And my husband is as you know, is a humorist, and has a book out. And so he would frequently kind of diffuse tension with a joke, which was like really rotten thing to do when somebody is in that kind of shape. But as I said, it only lasted a few days, and it was measurable progress each day. And walking around the hospital, and when I got home, I was, I took walks, and needed a nap in the afternoon. I think more as much from having had general anesthesia, like any major surgery that kind of lasts for a while, but it was a very easy recovery. And so I would kind of, just remind donors that it really does, in most cases. I mean, everybody's different, but it shouldn't last long. And psychologically, it's a hell of a feeling. It's just, in addition to the relief. I mean, after having been so scared, and my God, we got through this, and he's doing well, and I'm, I got through it. But in addition to the relief, it's just an extraordinary feeling. It's just a real high, really gratifying in a way that I really had not anticipated. Personally gratifying. I mean, I knew I'd be thrilled at the benefit to him. And that was what ultimately made me want to write about it and shout it from the rooftops. And people don't know. People don't know. They have no idea. A lot of people don't know that it's even possible. That's quite a lack there.
Well, and Jim, I was going to say, by the second day, the transplant was so much easier than the nephrectomy when they took my 2 kidneys out. Because of course they were huge. One was 7 pounds and one was almost 8 pounds. And so, thinking about 2 bags of sugar on your belly is pretty heavy. The transplant was so easy. By the second day, I was sitting up in bed reading a magazine.
Betsy, talk to us about the importance of family dynamics in kidney transplantation.
Yes. Thanks for asking. It was a really important thing. And don't do like I did. I am an optimist. I guess like my parents a little bit. Let's just move on. Everything's going to be fine. I sent both my kids to school that day. I didn't call the counselor or anybody else to even mention it to them. And my husband is a real worrywart. So we're at the opposite ends. And, every time the kids would bring up something, he'd say, no, we're not going to talk about that. Everything's fine. And when they bring it up to me, of course, I was saying everything was fine. Well, it wasn't so fine. And just a quick story, my daughter, they called her to the office about something completely different. By the time she got there, she was hysterical, crying, couldn't talk. Finally, after they got her calmed down, they said, Rachel, this is just about a form you need to get your parents to sign. And she said, I thought you were calling me because my mother had died. So, so luckily I did begin doing the right things. And that is, we brought 2 therapists together, and they worked with us for a couple of meetings, the whole family. They kind of worked us through the timeline of every event. When I first heard about it, the whole thing, and everybody talked. Nobody was allowed to comment or give answers back. And it really, I began to hear all this stuff both my kids were going to, and my husband, who's a worrywart, and how much I had missed, and missed the opportunity to ask them more questions, talk more with them, check in with them more often, and respond. I had done a lot of things like set up meal plan, and, they had a drive-in Miss Betsy to dialysis list. And, so I'd done a lot of those kind of, factual things, but I hadn't really paid attention. So it's so important to your spouse, your very closest friends, certainly your children, to be talking about this on an ongoing basis.
Okay. Betsy, talk to us about why community connections are important.
Yes, that's great. And I was very fortunate, like Carol was saying earlier, I was in really an optimal position. There were a number of people in my work area at the university in the speech and hearing sciences division. And then I had a great neighborhood association, and I was in a book club. So people in those groups both volunteered, and one group set up this meal planning thing. And the second time they did it for months. They did it for 4 months until I went back to work. I couldn't believe it. And then again, the first time I had to go to dialysis, and I couldn't drive for the first 6 weeks or something like that. So that's why they set up the Driving Miss Betsy list that people could sign up for, to have shifts to take me to and from dialysis, which, is about 4 hours apart. And, just people wrap themselves around my family to help them get the kids to sports and whatnot. And it just meant a lot that luckily I was situated in a really good community environment. So I think that, my motto is, if people ask, let them know what you need, because they're really anxious to do something for you. They just don't know what. And so take them up on it and say, yes, I'd love a ride to, or yes, if you could pick this up at CVS, that would be great.
I just want to mention something because we've been on the other side of it recently with a lot of friends who've been going through some medical things. And my husband and I have said, we have to remember, we shouldn't say, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to call on us. No, suggest something specific. Hey, I'm going to be out doing errands. Can I pick something up for you? Don't put the burden on the person who's going through all of this to come up with an assignment for you. If you say, hey, I'm bringing you dinner tomorrow night, or is the next night better? And we've been trying to practice what we've been preaching. And it's really, I mean, people are so well-meaning when they say, oh, if there's any way I can help, and just try to be more specific. If there's something you can do it, or suggest it anyway.
Okay. Carol, talk to us a little bit about supporting roles and why you wrote about that.
It takes a village. It's not, it's not just the surgeon and the donor and the recipient. There are so many people who need to be behind the scenes or even in front of the scenes. And in the book, we talk about the transplant team, the social workers, the donor coordinators, who really will, are holding your hand at every step of the way. Assuming you have a center as good as ours was, I hope most people can assume that kind of support. And caregivers. The caregivers are such an overlooked part of the puzzle, and in terms of needing support, needing psychological support, needing financial support. I mean, how many caregivers have had to, jeopardize their work situation because of taking care of a spouse or child? Like I said, I was very fortunate. One of the chapters in the book by Sharon Williams, who's a researcher and researcher on caregiving for people with chronic illnesses, I believe, and she was a caregiver for her husband, who who had kidney failure and I think several other things. So there's just so many people who, whether it takes more than just a donor to make a transplant. One of the people who wrote a chapter went through all the testing twice, actually, 2 different centers. And at the last minute, literally the night before the surgery, got a call saying, sorry, your kidney function is just too low for your own safety to go through with this. And she was devastated, but the system worked. She was, her health was paramount in that situation. She learned about what her needs were and to take better care of her kidneys. And she became a strong advocate. And she has helped other people who wanted to donate and who couldn't. So, it does take a village.
And Carol, Jim, if you don't mind, but Carol, why don't you mention, in terms of the staff and the support, why don't you mention the giving you an out anytime you wanted?
Oh, yeah. Particularly, for us wimps. And I tell people, don't hesitate to start, because what if I can't go through with it? because it's not like, well, once you start it, forget it. You're in for a dime, in for a dollar. No, literally up until the day of the surgery, they will say, "Are you certain you want to do this?" I mean, I've heard people say they thought they were trying to talk them out of it because they said it so many times. But that's a powerful feeling, and it's not. In other words, they're not going to turn around and tell the recipient, "Oh, she changed her mind." They will say that the someone was ruled out, for a medical reason, and that's really important. That's really helpful.
Okay. Both of you are now recognized kidney advocates. Let's start with Betsy first. Please describe your advocacy activities for us.
Okay, Carol should probably go first. Maybe Carol.
Okay, Carol.
Yeah,
go ahead.
First.
Okay, well,
and Carol, don't forget to talk about your writing or blogging.
Okay. So first the classic legislative activities, which I keep bumping into you in DC, Jim. Most recently, the American Kidney Fund went to Capitol Hill in May for meetings with legislative staffers. And in March or February this year, I think, with National Kidney Foundation for similar types of meetings. And those are fantastic. I just get, talk about how so many people don't know about kidney disease and transplant. And well, starting with the staffers, yes, some of them have been through these meetings before, but if you get somebody who's new, or a junior staffer, and they're learning about this from someone who's been through it both as a donor and as a family member, as a parent, they're wide-eyed and it feels great. I feel like, wow, they really heard me. I left an impression. I left an awareness that they didn't have before. And so that feels really great. And I tell them, I've been talking about kidney disease and transplant for years, and to anybody who'll listen, but I really like to talk to somebody who's in a position to do something about it. And I said to the kids, they're in their low 20s, some of them, I said, you have no idea how much power you have. You're going to talk to your boss about something that's so critical. And if you can make him or her hear you and hear these stories that you've just heard from me, from my teammates, it's great. So NKF, AKF, I'm working locally with Donate Life, local activities in North Carolina, at a street festival, giving out materials and answering questions. And by the way, $1 from every book we sell goes to Donate Life. We're part of their charitable sales partners or something. Let's see. And okay, so my blogging and my Medium pieces. So the kind of anything that might help people understand a little bit. My pieces are pretty informal and conversational, and I think they're less intimidating that way. And I sometimes use humor as well. And I think everyone knows this is an important subject, but I was intimidated as a writer. I didn't write about it for years. I thought, what do I have to add? What do I have to say? I don't have any medical credentials. And it took a while to realize and to be hit over the head with the fact that, dummy, the very fact that you've lived through all of this gives you credentials to talk about it and to tell people what they need to know. and that how important it is. So in the blogs and in the Medium pieces, I've been trying to shed more light on it. I did a piece called living kidney donors aren't what you may think, at least not if you think we're much different from you. And originally there was the image that went with the piece was sort of a like a murky mirror about, mystery. Well, that was about a year ago. I revised the piece recently, and the subtitle is "We're Neither Saints nor Superheroes," and the images of Spider-Man. Because I want people to realize that we're not a breed apart. People don't realize that they may even know a living donor, somebody from their neighborhood or their church or synagogue, mosque, and I don't want people to think that you have to be adventurous. You can be a wimp, or have to be, really, really risk taker. You just have to be. You have to be healthy. You just have to be a caring person who has the circumstances that they can do it. And so one of those myths, is to make people see that basically it's something to consider. It's not for everybody, but to come to it with inform yourself and have an open mind about it. So anyway.
And
Betsy, same
Yes,
question. Talk about your advocacy work, please.
Okay, well, I am associated with a couple of the organizations that Carol is, and then also the PKD Foundation, Polycystic Kidney Disease Foundation. And I have done more national work with my national organization going to Washington, but I hope to do more in this area. But I do want to mention our local work, because Carol and I have been fairly active over this time since the book was published, speaking to people, future kidney recipients or donors, and through our hospital in Duke. And then we've talked to a number of community groups, as Carol mentioned, churches, mosques, synagogues, community groups, Rotary, Civitan, some of those. And again, just trying to get this information out to the broadest audience we can, so that, that they know about this great need, and, would think about the possibility of donation. So I would say that's probably the most of the things that I've been doing advocacy wise. And then obviously we wrote the book, for that broader purpose in mind. And one of the things I will say about the book is, obviously it's for donors and recipients, but it's also, I think, like I needed for the whole family. And so somebody who is donating or receiving could share it around and let other people read it. I think they would learn much more about the process that the donor or recipient's going through, and maybe even more how to help.
Okay. Carol, talk to us a little bit about what's on the horizon for kidney transplant. What do you foresee in the future?
Well, for years now, we've been hearing about the artificial kidney, and alas, that's still pretty far in the future. But it's called the Kidney Project based at UCSF in California. When that does happen, that's going to be a game changer, because it's implantable and it's small. And my understanding is that people wouldn't require anti-rejection meds. And then, of course, there's cross species, or what's it called, xenotransplantation. I think. And that's made great strides.
Mm-hmm.
They've, I think I think it's pigs that have the closest
Yes.
cellular structure to humans, and they've had some success with that.
Yeah, a
So
couple of
that I think is
trials.
going to
Yeah.
going to be done more and more. But also, you mentioned before, Jim, about eplets. That's a word I'd never heard before about a year and a half ago. And wow, it is so important to find out that not all matches are equal. So, to be told that, oh, this is even a 6/6 antigen match, the eplets, the pattern of eplets on the antigens matter a lot. And so you could have what they call a low eplet mismatch, and it could make all the difference between a kidney lasting a few years and lasting many, many years. And so that's like really exciting. I was just blown away. There was a NKDO, National Kidney Donation Organization, had a symposium last year, and Dr. Dory Segev from NYU Langone Transplant Center spoke about it and said basically you're going to be hearing about this more, and that when people go to the transplant center, they need to ask, do you do eplet testing? Do you do high resolution testing? And and not every center does. So that's going to make a huge difference. And the initiative is called Kidney for Life. The idea that, no, not that you're going to need another one in 10, 15, 25 years, but that it could really last if it's a low eplet mismatch. Not easy to say.
And do you want to talk about the End Kidney Deaths Act?
I was going to ask about that because she had
Yeah, I
written
figured
about
that.
that recently.
Yeah, I think I told you, Jim, that actually your broadcast, one of your episodes in which you had Elaine Perlman and Ned Brooks on to talk about it, that really was just that little extra push that I needed, because conceptually I agreed with it, but I felt like, oh, but there's issues, and would it be, the poor giving to the wealthy and everything. And the episode, they really, you came at them from every direction, and all of my unspoken questions you had for them, and they answered very, very well, and really addressed them. And by the time it was over, I was a believer. And basically, it was all things I already knew, but kind of put it all together so well. Like, it's not currently an even playing field, as
Right.
Elaine pointed
Anyway,
out.
that's right.
Just that we're saying about, having the workplace people who could afford to take off to donate to you, or those with a lot of money who put up billboards or whatever. That's not something that somebody can do. And also,
have all large networks, or
right.
they're
So
computer savvy and they can connect with a lot of people. It's just
yeah. So this actually is more likely to benefit people who need it more and who are at a disadvantage. So yeah, I think this. So what it is for those who may be less familiar, if I get this right, $10,000 a year in refundable tax credits for 5 years, I believe. And so if somebody, and again, they really have thought of a lot of things. So if somebody makes too little to even pay taxes, then they would get the cash. So it's not just, only people who have that level. And the idea is that it would be a pilot program.
Right, and we're talking about donations to strangers, not between
Only.
family members.
Mhm.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, to me, the biggest thing, it's not selling it to somebody in a dark alley. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, you need a kidney.
No.
And that's definitely not. It's the same, all the safeguards that currently exist, all of the safety measures, everything would be under the normal conditions.
Well, tune in again next week, my friends, because we're going to have someone come on whose name is Nancy Marlin, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about the end of Kidney Deaths Act. And
Oh,
our
Great.
friend Elaine might come back and accompany her. I'm not sure yet. So
yeah.
just so people know.
Excellent.
We're in the home stretch, ladies. Let's talk about final statements. We'll go to Betsy first. Do you have any final statements that you would like to make to our audience tonight before we conclude the broadcast?
Yes, I would. The first thing I would say is, as I mentioned earlier, sort of know your numbers and, be as active as you can in monitoring your own health and changes. I think the more you know about those things, that's just my own opinion, the ready you can be and ready your family and friends for what's coming up in the future. So that's one thing. And then, just if you're in need of a donor, just shout it from the rooftops. I mean, don't be shy about sending info or even a poster to everybody at church or mosque, synagogue, community groups that you're in, book clubs, whatever it is, to let people know of your need, because people do care and people want to help. And so, as Carol said earlier about chores and other things, take them up on what that they do want to help.
Carol, same question.
I would say what I touched on before. Do not hesitate, donors, to tell your story, to mention it in passing. I find it just so sad that a lot of living donors do not talk about it for fear that people will think that they're trying to be the center of attention. They're trying to brag or, look how wonderful I am. I mean, there are ways to do it. And someone who is not that way, it'll be clear to anyone they know that they're not trying to be self-centered. And because if people, particularly those of us who've had good experiences, if we don't talk about it, then that lack of knowledge is going to persist, and all the myths. And people need to realize that yes, this is attainable, and that like I said, they may have already know somebody, and just it was somebody who was too shy to talk about it. So I urge living donors to talk, to just mention it in passing. Just find a way to work it into the conversation. I don't care. And I just think it's really, really, really important. And people are interested. People usually are really interested. It's exciting to be able to teach without being pedantic, just to edify somebody, just about something that's really important and could save their lives. And I always tell people, and find out what your kidney function is.
That's right.
No matter what.
Well, ladies, what an interesting broadcast. So many issues that we raised tonight, and so much awareness that comes from the two of you, from your experiences. And again, I want to stress what a terrific book. If you have any interest in kidney donation at all, go buy that book. Check it out. It is by far and away the best book I've read on kidney donation in a long, long time. And your Uncle Jim reads all of it, right?
Thank you for that, Jim.
And recipients.
And our our good friends here taking almost 2 hours to come and speak to us tonight to make sure that you're in the know. So please share the broadcast. Ladies, I have a couple of things I have to button up with my audience. I'm going to excuse both of you. I've kept you overtime. I realize that. And I just want to say I appreciate the tremendous contributions that you've made to help kidney patients.
Well, we certainly appreciate you giving us this opportunity to talk and to spread the word, Jim.
Yes, and you certainly
my great pleasure.
You made all this really easy and us feel very comfortable. So thanks for that too.
Absolutely.
That's why they call me Uncle Jim.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to let you guys go. Next week, as I mentioned, on October 25th, our guest is Nancy Marlin. She's going to be talking about the End of Kidney Deaths Act. Some of the things I actually forgot to cover in the first broadcast. She may or may not be back with Elaine. I'm not certain about that at this time, but I will be by Monday. So I'll let everybody know. And I just again I want to thank everybody for watching. I want to thank Carol and Betsy. What a terrific broadcast tonight, man! We touched on so many great subjects and interesting things for lay people and kidney people alike to discuss and talk about. And I know we definitely raised some awareness tonight. And with that, I thank everybody that hung in here for almost 2 hours with us. And again, I'll be sharing the replay with everyone. You can find it in all my groups and all the platforms that I normally share on. Everything from WordPerfect to Twitter. So, and even TikTok. Your Uncle Jim's on TikTok too. So
Great.
All right. So, and please share. So with that, I'm going to say good night and thanks to our guests who did such a wonderful job tonight. And I will see everybody next week.
Jim, can you hear me?
Yeah,
And nobody else can?
everybody else can.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to know if you were serious about my changing the name of the promo code.
Yeah, would you please? I don't want Facebook to take our broadcast and decide they're not going to let me publish it.
Oh, okay. So, all right. I'll do it tomorrow. Okay.
Okay, works for me.
Thanks again. Good night.
All right. Good night, everybody.